As I was reading 12 Months, I realized that the most underrated character in this entire book is the world building. And I didn't realize it until I read this book, and what it means for the entire rest of the series, but especially the promised Kaiju book, which I know we're all excited for, and I'm going to tell you why. All of this builds up on each other, so I'm going to start very, very small and sort of let everything grow. Promise it'll be worth your time, just stick with me. We're going to start out talking about the antagonists in this story, and I mean antagonists with a little a. First, we have Bach and his associates using Kravos' book to do dark magic. If you don't remember who Kravos is, he is the evil ghost wizard dude in the third book, Grave Peril. And this is very reminiscent of what happened in the first 3 books. It reminds me a lot of how someone just gifted Victor Sells information to make the 3-eye substance and gave the wolf belts to the FBI agents and gave Kravos that magic book full of dark secrets and stuff. And now, after helping Bach and his associates figure out the error of their ways and protecting them from a very overzealous White Council and the Wardens, which Dresden used to be one, Harry is now in possession of that book. This could give him another tool in Mirror Mirror or something for Dark Harry to steal. I assume that Dark Harry is going to be the Mirror Mirror baddie at this point. Like, come on, guys. And the way that Molly helped Dresden get the Wardens off of their tail was really great. Basically, they need to do paperwork and ask Marcone's permission to do anything in Chicago now because somebody actually cares if they're, like, sticking to their territory or not. And I think that with Harry not being part of the White Council and being the guy who's just going to go over the borders and mess with Marcone's land on his own willy-nilly, the White Council is going to have to rethink that whole, oh, we abandoned this guy thing. Or maybe they're trusting him to use his judgment and not go after people who don't necessarily deserve it. But their track record ain't so great on that. But then you get the people who Bach and his associates were really trying to get back at, the Renegade Brotherhood of St. Bridget members. This group made me think a lot harder than I probably should have, but I think I learned a lot, and that's going to come in this video, so I'm just going to get into it. The Renegade Brotherhood basically came up of people taking their fear and turning it into aggression. People are scared of what they don't understand, but that doesn't give them permission to be violent to random strangers who they just decide to blame. It's sad that this hateful group of people found a way to hurt their neighbors while serving in an interfaith-sponsored law enforcement group that's supposed to be protecting people. And the Brotherhood of St. Bridget is supposed to be protecting the people of Chicago from creatures that are actively attacking them. They're not supposed to just label everyone with magical ability as an enemy and hurt people just because they make assumptions and just want to be hateful. Like, these guys made me really mad. That might be just because we're learning the story from Harry's perspective. We know that these people are innocent, but at the same time, like, as somebody who considers himself a good person, this really made me question, like, what would I do in that situation? They basically at one point tried to pull a witch hunt on Harry when he was one helping them. They were like, oh, he has this magical ability to make everything go away. Maybe he's the problem. And it's like, dude, what are you on? Harry is powerful enough magically and with the respect of Father Forthill and the Carpenters to tell them to go pound sand, but most people aren't. And that makes him very, very dangerous to people who aren't on Harry's power level, which is basically everybody. We also have this group of protesters who are taking their fear of magic use and turning it into hate. And they might not be doing it with their fists, but they're doing it with their words. They're doing it with their community. And it's still, in my opinion, a form of violence because they're trying to force people to feel uncomfortable enough to leave their homes. And that's not okay. Much like Bach and his associates, the people protesting are scared and they're just trying to do something about it. Or at least that's what they think. Fear of the unknown is the first step to wanting to eliminate it without asking any questions. It's also very symbolic that House Malvora was present. More on that later. Harry knows that they have a right to voice their grievances in public, and him being a powerful wizard doesn't give him the right to make them go away. This is the US. To my international watchers, we are supposed to have freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and we are supposed to be able to express our opinions on matters in public without having authorities come after us for it. And not even Harry Dresden has the right to take that away from us. The hot chocolate stand showed what happens when people become so divisive that they won't interact with the other side. You lose any line of discourse where you can try to understand the other side and maybe work together on a compromise. Now, I know that sometimes people are just wrong and that compromise is not good enough, but going back to the Renegade St. Bridget guys, making a group of people into an other or the enemy instead of your neighbors that have characteristics of things that scare you is dangerous because that's how division happens. When you see people as not the same as you, that allows you to think of them as a danger and not as your community members, and it lets fear take the lead. This is where House Malvora is basically a blatant allegory for what happens when fear is a fuel. They feed off of fear, as seen in Proven Guilty at SplatterCon, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point, like how House Wraith feeds off of lust. House Malvora uses the fear of others as energy to make themselves more powerful, so they literally use fear as food. They don't care about the well-being of the people who are frightened, they just want to harvest it to use it for their own endeavors, like storming a castle and taking out a wizard of Chicago. That is the only thing keeping the peace right now. They thrive in chaos, and they thrive with fear, and so they must increase fear, increase chaos so that it creates more fear, and get in the way of anything that creates stability and takes that away from them. That's not to say that Harry is the only one repairing the city and helping the people, but he's definitely giving the city the metaphorical shirt off his back. He's literally using all the wealth from the diamonds he acquired in Skin Game and his political favors and influence with Laura Wraith and other supernatural groups to keep people safe and housed and with access to medical care while he's trying to grieve Murphy. He's providing hope and stability, and that counteracts fear, and it weakens House Malvora's access to what for them is basically an all-you-can-eat buffet. Other people in power, like Dracul and Lord Wraith, will use this anger and unwillingness to talk to the other side as a way to make normal, everyday people do things to the enemy that they would otherwise never do. The conflict is also a great way for these power players to hide their own folks and make things worse on purpose so that they can use the situation to get what they want. The white and black court vampires were able to use this as a way to hide in plain sight while they got their people into position to storm Dresden's castle and use mortals as a human shield, because if Harry made any of them go bye-bye, the White Council would take him out. They knew that Harry couldn't just fuego his way out of this without hurting other people and getting put on the top of the warden's to-do list. Big disclaimer, I mean no disrespect when I say that I decided to read Hiroshima by John Hershey as a palate cleanser book, since I was a bit burnt out on Dresden Files and I wanted to read something educational. But I ended up seeing a lot of things in that book that helped me understand the world building in the Dresden Files post-battleground Chicago. And it perfectly sets the stage for the next kaiju book Jim Butcher has been teasing, and let me explain, I promise all of this is going to make sense in a second. Like countless unnamed normals in Battleground, at the end of World War II, Hiroshima gets decimated by an attack that nobody at the time understood. The explosion and fallout of the atomic bomb burned people and spread radiation that made people sick, some people expiring within days, and others having lifelong health issues even decades later. They were called hibakusha, or explosion-affected people, and were discriminated against by people who thought their illnesses were contagious or made them bad employees because they couldn't work as effectively as non-affected people. Years later, helping the hibakusha get better treatment and help from the Japanese government was a big political issue, and these people went through hell. Thinking back to Chicago and Battleground, the ample radiant magic in the city during the battle that powered up folks like Will Borden and Fitz reminds me of the trope where a superhero gets exposed to radiation and gets powers from it, like Spider-Man. Many minor talent people are powered up into a higher weight class of practitioner from this event, and that probably makes it harder for them to hide from people like the Renegade Brotherhood of St. Bridget, but it does give them enough power to try to fight them. The testing of samples from Dresden's castle for a contaminant that causes heebie-jeebies also makes me think of magic as a stand-in for radiation. Maybe not a one-to-one stand-in, but there's similarities here, and it just made me go down a rabbit hole, y'all. But how does this set things up for the kaiju book, and what does kaiju even mean? Well, I'm glad you asked. The undisputed king of kaiju is a monster you all know very well, and it is Godzilla, who himself is a metaphor for the destruction of the nuclear bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. The first Godzilla film, released in Japan in 1954, relies heavily on these themes. Later Godzilla movies in Japan do turn him into an anti-hero who's on humanity's side, or use him as a metaphor for the dangers of pollution, and some of the works with Godzilla in them in like the 70s, 80s kind of time period make him out to be pretty silly. So there's different iterations of Godzilla for sure, but the original inspiration from him did come from the fallout of World War II and how the war ended for Japan. I actually took a trip to Japan, and when we went to Hiroshima, we spent the entire afternoon at the Peace Museum, which, if you can go, it's like a life-changing experience. It talks a lot about the fallout, shows you objects that people had left behind. It showed the carnage. It showed the grotesque medical conditions that people were in, and it made me feel completely awful for the people, even more so than from, reading books and stuff. And when I was at the Peace Museum, they had an entire exhibit on Godzilla for this very reason. Now, I don't know if Jim Butcher's Kaiju book will stick strictly to the source material, but the fallout of events in Battleground does set up the world building to borrow heavily from this genre. We could have Harry learn to shapeshift from Listens to Wind or from River Shoulders, who taught Listens to Wind in the first place, and use that to become a giant monster to defend his city against other giant monsters from the Fomor or the Outsiders, or even the baddies in Outlaw, which I am halfway done reading. I have thoughts on that too. This would definitely fit Godzilla's anti-hero era, where he was a big bad monster whose, I guess, redeeming quality, if you want to call it that, is fighting other big bad monsters who are trying to destroy humanity. I also saw some word of Jim that made me think a little bit differently about this. In a 2015 interview with Slippery Words, which is mentioned on Jim Butcher's site but taken down on theirs, read into that what you will, this question pops up. At the beginning of the series, there's only a vague, amorphous big bad. As the series has progressed, it's gotten more complicated and much more convoluted. How much of this were you planning all the way back when you started writing? To be perfectly honest, this seems like a question he gets every single interview, and it's kind of annoying at this point doing the Word of Jim because most of the interviews are the same, like 8 to 10 questions. And Jim says all of it. I kind of had a good idea of what the big bad was and what it looked like, and where it all lined up. We've still got really exciting things in front of us. We've got giants and apocalypse, which I'm judging to be the plural of apocalypse, kaiju, and gods. Plus, we're going to have a dragon versus wizard fight, because you knew that was coming. This might mean that Butcher is going to give us a fight between Dresden and Pharaohvax. You don't have a dragon show up and refuse to be a major player in the story unless he's an endgame guy. He also received a gift at Bianca's party in grave peril, so he may well be infected and just doesn't know it yet. Or maybe he does, and we just don't know it yet. Except for you watch this channel, so you probably already know it. Another possibility is that the dragon mentioned is Dracul, since his name literally means dragon or damned in Romanian. He gave Dresden his card, which was an open invitation to fight him, so this could work out. The kaiju fight could also be part of the wrestling book, since we already have gods fighting each other. I haven't found the word of Jim on this, but I have seen on Reddit that Jim Butcher wanted to do a wrestling book, and then it got scrapped, but it might still be a thing. I don't know right now. I'm kind of confused. If you know where that word of Jim is, put it down in the comments where it belongs. Not feeling great about that, but who knows what works when Butcher sits down to write the last couple books. I think that having the wrestling book at the end of the series, like right before we get to the big apocalyptic trilogy, makes a lot of sense, since the gods get their power from people believing in them, even if it's like believing in them in a different way, like being fans of them as wrestlers and stuff. It's a good way to power up all of the gods and stuff to get them ready for the last battle, and it just makes sense from like a power scaling perspective. All right, friends, thank you for joining me for this video. Sorry for the wait. I've been adulting too hard lately. I still think it's fun, but also some days my brain is way too fried to work on this stuff, and I apologize because I know that this is something that y'all really appreciate me doing. Hard to find friends as an adult, and I consider everyone here to be my friend, so I appreciate you. Thank you so much for being here. Leave me a comment down below if you want to say hi or want to say hi to other people, because this should be a community. We're all people who love Dresden Files. I think that that's enough to bring us together. Bye.